Battle of Bluff. How a river became a graveyard. What happens when a U.S. Senator trades his seat in Congress for a battlefield and ends up dying in a hail of musket fire? Why did hundreds of Union soldiers plunge into the icy Potomac River not from bravery but from sheer panic? And how did a simple scouting mission spiral into one of the most humiliating defeats of the Civil War? This isn't just a story of bullets and bayonets. It's a tale of miscommunication, misplaced confidence, and a senator who thought he could command troops like he commanded votes. It's about how one wrong move turned a bluff into a bloodbath and how the river itself became a graveyard for the Union's hopes. So buckle up, history lovers. You're about to witness a battle where the boats sank, the generals argued, and the Confederates yelled like banshees. Stick around to the end. You won't believe how this one finishes. 3 months had passed since the Union's humiliating defeat at Bull Run, or Manassas, as the Confederates proudly called it. The Eastern Theater had gone eerily quiet. The Potomac River, once a potential highway to victory, had become a border of skirmishes and picket firefights. The Union Army, licking its wounds, was in desperate need of redemption. Enter Major General George B. McClellan, the young, ambitious officer who had dazzled with victories in Western Virginia. On July 26th, President Lincoln replaced the beleaguered Brigadier General Irvin McDowell with McClellan, hoping to turn the tide, and turn it he did, at least on paper. McClellan transformed the ragged militia into the Army of the Potomac, a well-drilled force of volunteers. But despite the polish, the battlefield remained quiet. McClellan's own words summed it up. All quiet along the Potomac. But quiet never lasts long in war. Guarding the river crossings near Leesburg, Virginia, was Brigadier General Charles Pomeroy Stone, commander of the Corps of Observation. Confederate movements under General Joseph E. Johnston suggested Leesburg might be ripe for the taking. Reports claimed it was lightly defended by Colonel Nathan Shanks Evans, a veteran of Bull Run. On October 20th, McClellan sent Stone a telegram. "Keep a good lookout upon Leesburg. Perhaps a slight demonstration on your part would have the effect to move them." Stone took this suggestion to heart. That evening, Captain Chase Philbrick led 20 volunteers from the 15th Massachusetts across the river at Harrison's Island. They returned with news: a Confederate camp near Leesburg. What they had actually seen, a row of trees. But the sunlight had played tricks, and the illusion would soon become deadly. At dawn on October 21st, exactly 3 months after Bull Run, Stone's men began crossing the Potomac in small rowboats, scaling the steep cliffs of Bluff. The plan was simple: a light demonstration to test Confederate strength. Colonel Charles Devens led companies A, C, G, H, and I of the 15th Massachusetts up the bluff. They advanced toward the Jackson House, leaving Colonel William R. Lee's 20th Massachusetts to guard the river exit. Meanwhile, a feint maneuver was underway at Edwards Ferry, led by Brigadier General Willis Gorman and overseen by Major John Mix of the 3rd New York Cavalry. 2 companies of the 1st Minnesota formed a skirmish line as Mix advanced toward Goose Creek, hoping to distract the Confederates. But Mix's force was small. Around 7:30 a.m., they clashed with Colonel William Barksdale's 13th Mississippi, exchanging fire at just 30 yards. Unsure of the enemy's size, Mix withdrew by 7:45 a.m. Back at Bluff, Devens realized something was wrong. The camp, reported by Philbrick, just trees. At 8 a.m., Devens learned that Company K of the 17th Mississippi, led by Captain William Duff, was on his right flank. Duff, unaware he was facing 300 Federals, moved to intercept. Devens responded by sending Company H forward and flanking with Company A. Duff, sensing danger, pulled back toward the road, trying to lure the Federals away from his support. When the Union troops came within 60 yards, Duff's men opened fire. Devens sent Company G to reinforce, but reports of rebel cavalry on the left forced a recall. Duff also withdrew. The skirmish left 1 Union soldier dead, 9 wounded, and 2 missing. 3 Confederates were wounded. Though small, the clash alerted Colonel Evans that Union forces were moving inland. Devens, now aware of his exposed position, pulled back to the bluff, then returned to his previous location upon learning reinforcements were coming. Rather than take direct command, Stone handed the reins to Colonel Edward Dickinson Baker, a sitting U.S. Senator and Lincoln's close friend. Baker was ordered to oversee the operation and act at his discretion. Meanwhile, Evans received reports of multiple Union crossings. The activity at Edwards Ferry was visible, and the morning's firefight had confirmed that the Federals were advancing. The stage was set. Miscommunication, faulty intelligence, and political pressure had created a perfect storm. What began as a slight demonstration was about to become a full-blown disaster. Now pause for a sec. Join the front lines of history and power. Welcome to European Battle, where epic clashes, legendary warriors, and untold stories come alive. By subscribing and turning on notifications, you're not just joining a channel, you're stepping into a world of thrilling battles, strategic brilliance, and jaw-dropping historical drama. From ancient empires to modern warfare, we deliver cinematic storytelling, expert insights, and exclusive content that will leave you breathless. Why subscribe? Unlock premium battle breakdowns and rare historical footage. Be the first to witness new episodes and live events. Join a passionate community of history lovers and strategy minds. Fuel your curiosity with facts, theories, and fierce debates. Don't just watch history. Live it. Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications to never miss a moment of the action. Your front row seat to Europe's greatest battles is just one click away. European Battle, where legends clash. The sun climbed slowly over the misty banks of the Potomac on October 21, 1861, casting long shadows across the Virginia countryside. The Union forces, still smarting from their defeat at Bull Run, were eager to redeem themselves. But what unfolded at Bluff would become a tragic symphony of misjudgment, valor, and chaos. Confederate Colonel Nathan "Shanks" Evans, a seasoned veteran of Manassas, had been watching the Union movements with a wary eye. He knew that Brigadier General George McCall's Pennsylvania reserves near Drainesville were no longer a threat, freeing him to focus entirely on the crossings at Edwards Ferry and Ball's Bluff. But Evans was no fool. He didn't know where the Union's main thrust would come, so he chose caution over bravado. He reinforced Captain William Duff with 4 rifle companies, E and K of the 18th Mississippi, D of the 13th Mississippi, and I of the 17th Mississippi. To add mobility and sting, he dispatched 3 undersized Virginia cavalry units, the Loudon Cavalry, Chesterfield Light Dragoons, and the Madison Invincibles. All these forces were placed under the command of Lieutenant Colonel Walter H. Jennifer, Evans' trusted cavalry commander. Meanwhile, Evans kept the bulk of his Mississippi regiments at Fort Evans, while Colonel Eppa Hunton's 8th Virginia guarded Burnt Bridge to the east. At 9 a.m., Jennifer received his orders and marched toward Ball's Bluff with 320 men. But instead of waiting for the Union to make the first move, Jennifer stretched his orders and went on the offensive. Unbeknownst to him, the Union force had swelled to 625 men, with the full arrival of Colonel Devens, 15th Massachusetts. Evans, sensing the escalation, ordered all but Company H of the 8th Virginia to reinforce Jennifer. But the Virginians wouldn't arrive until after Jennifer had already engaged in the morning's second skirmish. By 11 a.m., Jennifer's line faced east, ready to strike. He deployed 1 company of the 18th Mississippi as skirmishers, with Captain Duff's Company K of the 17th Mississippi anchoring the left. A company of the 13th Mississippi and the cavalry filled out the line, a long, thin formation with dangerous gaps. A stout fence blocked any cavalry charge. So Jennifer dismounted 1 company and sent them forward on foot. They fired from behind the fence until Jennifer ordered it torn down. The horsemen surged forward, forcing the Federals to fall back briefly before regrouping. By 11:45 a.m., the battlefield fell into a tense lull. Meanwhile, at Edwards Ferry, General Gorman's brigade was crossing the Potomac as fast as the boats could carry them. Hearing that Colonel Baker was sending more troops to Ball's Bluff, General Stone ordered additional crossings at Edwards Ferry. At 12:15 p.m., the 8th Virginia received orders to support Jennifer. They rushed past Fort Evans and formed behind Jennifer's line. The lull ended at 12:30 p.m. as the 8th Virginia arrived, setting the stage for the 3rd skirmish of the day. Now the Confederates outnumbered Devens' 15th Massachusetts. At 1 p.m., the 8th Virginia opened fire on the 15th Massachusetts. Using the woods for cover, they tried to envelop the Union flanks. Despite being outnumbered and under heavy fire, the Bay Staters held their ground, exchanging brutal volleys for an hour. While the 15th Massachusetts fought valiantly, 5 companies of the 20th Massachusetts arrived at the Bluff and took position on the eastern edge of the clearing. At 1:30 p.m., they were reinforced by 2 12-pounder mountain howitzers, detached from the 2nd New York State Militia and manned by a mixed crew from that unit and Battery 1's 2nd U.S. Artillery. 2nd Lieutenant Frank French commanded the guns. These lightweight cannons, only 500 pounds each, were ideal for the close-quarters terrain. Their deployment lifted Union morale, a flicker of hope in the growing storm. Concerned about the Union threat at Edwards Ferry, Evans dispatched the 13th Mississippi to monitor Gorman's brigade. This left only 2 Confederate regiments in reserve at Fort Evans. Between 1:30 and 2 p.m., Colonel Baker scrambled to get more troops across the river. He ordered his men to splice ropes together to stretch a line across the Potomac and scrounge up every boat they could find, including a large canal boat from the Chesapeake and Ohio Canal. By 2:15 p.m., Baker himself crossed into Virginia. Before his boots touched the soil, he was already committed to battle. "Hurry all men you can," he shouted. "Get everything that can float. Cross every man you can into Virginia." The 1st California, part of Baker's California Brigade, soon to be rebranded as the Philadelphia Brigade, crossed next. Though named for the Golden State, most of its men hailed from Pennsylvania. Before Colonel Edward D. Baker, a sitting U.S. Senator and close friend of President Lincoln, arrived on the Bluff, one company of the 1st California Regiment had already secured a foothold. But the Confederates were watching. Colonel Eppa Hunton of the 8th Virginia, low on ammunition and high on concern, dispatched urgent messages to Colonel Nathan Shanks Evans via Private Elijah Lige White, a local townsman turned cavalry runner. By 3 p.m., Union reinforcements surged onto the high ground above the Potomac. More companies of the 1st California arrived, along with a 14-pounder James rifle cannon from Battery B, 1st Rhode Island Light Artillery, commanded by Lieutenant Walter Bramhall. Baker, energetic but inexperienced, tried to organize the defense, but the result was a tangled mess of units and unclear command. The Union line began to resemble an awkward L shape, with scattered companies from the 15th and 20th Massachusetts and the 1st California. Skirmishers guarded the ravines on both flanks, and Baker sent 3 more companies into the woods to scout for Confederate movement. At 3:15 p.m., the Confederates opened fire with a spitting volley. The Federals returned fire just as the 42nd New York arrived. Its commander, Colonel Milton Cogswell, was stunned by the chaos. Meanwhile, Colonel Erasmus Burt of the 18th Mississippi reinforced his engaged companies. Back in Washington, Brigadier General Stone sent a stream of telegrams to General McClellan, many of them vague, some outright wrong, adding confusion to an already unraveling situation. At 3:30 p.m., Cogswell warned Baker that their line was dangerously exposed. The wooded hills beyond the ravine were unoccupied but perfectly positioned for a Confederate assault. He urged Baker to seize them immediately. Baker dismissed the advice. Frustrated, Cogswell placed 2 of his companies behind the main line. While Union officers argued, the Confederates realigned. Most of the 8th Virginia moved south of the cart path, while a few companies held the extreme right. In the dense woods ahead, Companies A and D of the 1st California probed for enemy strength. They found it when the 8th Virginia fired from the top of the slope. The rest of the Virginians joined in, unleashing musket volleys through the trees. Within 30 minutes, the 1st California lost 2/3 of its men. Retreat was the only option. Then came the death blow. At 4:30 p.m., Colonel Baker was struck by a bullet from a Confederate sharpshooter. He died shortly after, becoming the only sitting U.S. Senator ever killed in battle. His death shattered the Union line. At 5 p.m., the Confederates let loose the infamous rebel yell and charged. The 1st California collapsed on the left. On the right, the 17th and 18th Mississippi smashed through. The Union's mountain howitzers and James rifle were captured. The Federal retreat became a panicked rout. With their backs to the Bluff and the river, Union soldiers scrambled for boats, many overloaded, some capsizing. Wounded men drowned in the Potomac's unforgiving current. Confederates fired down from the bluff. Union soldiers were gunned down in the water. About 500 Federals became trapped on Harrison's Island, unable to cross back to Maryland without being shot. By 6 p.m., the battle was ending. The 17th and 18th Mississippi rounded up stragglers. After dark, volunteers from the 8th Virginia descended the bluff and captured the trapped Union force. What began as a reconnaissance had become a full-blown disaster. The Union lost 223 killed, 226 wounded, and 553 captured, nearly 1,000 men. Confederate losses were light: 36 killed, 117 wounded, and 2 captured. Bodies floated downriver into Washington, horrifying onlookers. Some reached as far as Mount Vernon. The shock led Congress to create the Joint Committee on the Conduct of the War, sparking years of political infighting. President Lincoln mourned the loss of his friend Baker, a man who had played with his children on the White House lawn just weeks before. In February 1862, Brigadier General Stone was imprisoned, scapegoated for the defeat. McClellan, shaken, adopted a more cautious strategy, delaying major action until the Peninsula Campaign the following spring. For the rest of the winter, the Eastern Theater fell silent. The nation's gaze turned westward. Before you march off like Baker's brigade. If you're captivated by stories like this, where history meets heartbreak and heroism, then don't miss a single chapter. Subscribe to our channel, click the notification bell, drop a comment and tell us, what would you have done differently at Ball's Bluff? We've got more gripping tales coming your way, from battlefield blunders to legendary last stands. Stay tuned, stay curious, and let history come alive.